Welcome back to In the Kitchen with Picken. We are going to make an apple pie entirely from scratch today. But before any of that, I would like to say a happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers, grandmothers, sisters, aunts that have taken care of children, not always having been their own. Thank you for everything that you've done. You are appreciated. So here we have all of our flour. I like to put my flour in a nice big glass container because when I leave it in the plastic bag, there's a higher possibility that it's going to get moist or humid. So this is a very safe way to lock in that freshness. And you might have noticed in the beginning that I have a spoon in there. I leave a spoon in the container so that I don't, first off, it's easier to measure if you spoon it out into your measuring cup. Never do the pour of flour. And also, it's just a little easier if the spoon's already in there. However, when you pour more flour in, you have to make sure you don't lose it. Sounds like all the dogs are awake with us. Rick's gonna edit that out. So the ingredients we're going to be using today are a cup and a quarter of flour, their little Pyrex measuring cup, a quarter cup of chilled water, a teaspoon of salt, and half a cup of chilled butter. The butter was also in the freezer, so it is nice and chilled. And before we get started, let's wash our hands. You want to make sure that we get between the fingers, the palms, the backs of our hands. We're going to be working with dough, so we're even going to go up about a quarter way to our elbows. It's very important that we clean our hands, especially since we're going to be really working with the ingredients. Your hands are going to get very personal with the dough as we're kneading it inside of the bowl. So it's important to make sure that our nails, our hands are all clean. If you have any rings on, I highly suggest taking them off now. I've already taken my ring off because I knew what this can do. So we're gonna start preparing our butter. We need, most containers of butter will have the measurements. There it goes. Half a cup is this much. So the measurement's already on the box. I'm just gonna line it up. Now, half a cup of butter seems like a lot. And to be honest, it kind of is. We need to cut it and then dice it. Why are we doing that? So when we mix our butter in with the flour salt mixture, it's going to require that we mix it in with a fork until it gets nice and sandy. It really is going to look like sand. And we can't get that kind of incorporation if the butter is one big piece of butter. And we can't get that kind of incorporation if the butter is room temperature. So, feeling it, I feel that my butter is just not cold enough. I need it to be a little bit colder. Do not waste butter here. So I'm going to toss it in the ice box inside of the freezer and see if that helps. The ice will be fine. So now we're going to measure out our 1 cup and a quarter of flour. When you're done using your flour, don't put it away. We'll be using it later on. See, this makes less of a mess than trying to tilt over the container and pour. So when we're measuring out our cups, we have to remember that flour can compact and flour can be separated. If we want it to compact a little bit, just hit the side of the container, not very hard. You don't want to bruise it. And we'll see that I have just a little bit too much. It'll be fine. Okay, so that's 1 1/4 cups of flour. Put my spoon back in, my lid on, because again, I don't want any moisture getting in there. Now we're going to use a teaspoon of salt. I like to use Himalayan sea salt. Himalayan salt. It's pink, so pleasing to the eye. But it is also healthier than sea salt, and sea salt is healthier than iodized salt. I do not suggest having iodized salt in your home at all. It's just not gonna be as helpful. Iodized salt has more chemicals in it, and it goes through more processes than sea salt and Himalayan salt. I am a salt fiend, but we do try to stay on a low sodium diet, which I then add salt to when I'm done cooking. But during the cooking process, we keep it low sodium. And we're going to take a little pause and wait for our butter to chill just a little bit. And here we are. Let's not forget to put our ice back. So this is going to go directly. I'm going to do a little turn with the fork, and then we are going to use our hands to knead it, and we're trying to break the butter down into the flour. So we're taking and we're pinching and turning. We're going to do that for a couple of minutes until it resembles a fine sand. We want the flour to incorporate entirely with the butter. Especially with my warm hands, if we didn't have the butter chilled to an appropriate temperature, it would have just melted and not given us the texture that we're looking for. Let's come up closer to the camera. Okay, that's a little bit of what we're going for. Okay, I think we're good. So I'm going to pull this water closer to me, and 1 teaspoon at a time, mix in our water. Let's see. Why are we doing it 1 teaspoon at a time? Pie crust is very delicate and doesn't have to be very wet. You don't want the pie crust to be to a point where it's getting very sticky to your hands and you're pulling it away and it's goopy. If we put too much water in and if we put it in too fast, we're not going to be able to tell when it gets to that sweet spot, and you're going to see exactly what it looks like. So you're going to see that it starts sticking to itself. Now we still have a lot of pieces not sticking, so we are still going to put water, but it's going to start sticking to itself. We want to create one big ball inside of the dough. Just a little bit more water. We're almost there. Okay, I think we're there. Less than half of a teaspoon left. Now we're going to start creating a ball. All of that delicious dough. This is going to create, especially with the butter, a very flaky dough. I'm using the ball of dough to pick up the little bits of dough in the bottom. Kind of like a lint brush. Get a little bit of that dough off my fingers. So let's come and observe exactly what this looks like. And then we wrap it up. Always use the inside of your saran wrap or plastic wrap, because the outside has your fingerprints. That was unexpected. Just a little bit more. We're going to continue to knead the flour and continue to knead the plastic wrap. So don't put those away too far, but while we let this chill in our refrigerator, nice and tight ball, leaving no air pockets. While we let this chill in the refrigerator, we can start to put away our bowl, our measuring cups, any of the tools that we use, as well as the butter. Flour and saran wrap we're still going to be using. So this is going to go into the fridge, and we'll see you after this short break. Hey friends, so our pie crust has been in the fridge for about an hour, and we're going to start working on our filling. So when we're talking about making any kind of apple pie, really apple pie, applesauce, when we're cooking with apples, we're going to want to use a variety of apples. It's going to give it a richer, more complex flavor. As you can see, we've already started peeling our apples, and it's going to take me a minute to cut that, so I'm just going to put a little bit of lemon juice on it. This lemon juice is going to help keep it from browning. Even though we're cooking it, we'd rather not have it start to brown. Now, the cool thing about making apple pie or applesauce is that you don't have to use the freshest of apples. You can use apples that have been sitting on your counter for a while, which is what our apples have been doing. So we're just going to peel these, and let's see what all of these peeled apples become. Now that we have all of our apples peeled, we're going to go ahead and take out the seeds. I have a teaspoon. You can also use a melon baller. If you have a measuring cup for the perfect cup, a measuring spoon for the perfect cup of tea, that also works. You can also use knives. So we're just going to stick our spoon in at a slight angle and then spin it so that we pull out the whole half of the core. And then we're also going to want to take out the little bit that has the little hairs at the bottom. As the old adage goes, why a spoon, sir? 'Cause it'll hurt more. So we're just going to keep on going, pitting all of these guys, pitting them against each other. Now, the apples that I'm using today are both soft apples. If you've ever bitten into a Macintosh apple, you'll feel that it has a very different texture than biting into a Granny Smith apple. Now, These are the apples that we had, so these are the apples that we're using. But I highly suggest getting a good variety. Here we have Macintoshes and we have delicious apples. Okay. But if you can add one Granny Smith to your recipe, if you can add one Granny Smith to your recipe, it's highly suggested because it's going to, again, give you a higher complexity in flavor. Now, when we're doing this, we have to make sure that we went deep enough to get all of the core out. There we go. After taking out the cores of all of these apples, we're then going to slice them. When we're making our filling, there's a couple of ways to make fruit fillings. Because these are older apples, we're going to boil them in just a little bit of water. Really, they're going to be cooking in their own vapor. With a little bit of a little bit of sugar, a little bit more lemon juice, because that's going to add to the complexity. When you're cooking your apples, you have to make sure to keep an eye on them. As soon as the fluid goes, the apple goes, and it'll probably start to burn. Can't tell you how many times we've had slightly burnt applesauce in this house. Sure, Ricardo will probably be able to tell you. There we go, slicing everything. So I broke one of my apples accidentally, but it does not matter because at the end of the day, this is all going to be inside of a pie. So no one's going to be able to see your cuts and say, oh, my dear, that cut is terrible, because it's going to be inside of a pie. And honestly, if they're paying attention to the cut of the apple inside of the pie, we did something wrong. That they're not paying attention to the flavor, the flakiness of the crust. Or your cute face. Just slicing away at our apples. Again, doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be cut. Now, once you start peeling your apples, you don't want to take too many breaks. I did a couple of things while we were waiting for our crust to chill, but I'm not going to want to take any breaks between peeling the apple and then putting it on the stove to cook. Why is that? Because the apple will go brown, even with our little trick of using the lemon to maintain it. We don't have to work very fast either. Remember, safety first. If at any point you feel like you're moving too fast, like you're using your knife a little too willy-nilly, slow down, take a breath. The apple will still be there. Do not hurt yourself, please. And there we go. We have all of our sliced apples. So in just a minute, we're going to move over to the stove. But first, we wash our hands. Hey friends, so here we are at the stove to start working on our filling. Now, some of the things we're going to use over here are brown sugar, a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of vanilla, of course our apples, and more lime. When we're using our lime, what we have to remember is we're going to get more juice out of it if we roll it against the counter. You can roll it with the side of your knife, you can roll it with your palm, whatever you're more comfortable with. Okay? We're going to get more juice out of that. So let's start with a little bit of water. Now we only want about 1 inch deep in our pot. Now I start with pre-boiled water because I'm leaving it at a much higher altitude, which means water takes a lot longer to get boiling. We're going to try to separate our apple bits so that each slice gets infused with flavor. Now, the crust that we made, we can use with apple pie, pumpkin pie, just about any pie. I don't suggest it for cheesecake. I don't suggest it for mousse, if you're making a kind of mousse. The pie that we made today with that beautiful butter crust is really going to taste delicious also with berry pies, strawberry rhubarb pie. You can make just about any kind of pie you want. Me oh my. We see that our apples are getting to about the surface of our container. So we're going to do a little shake so that it settles. Just a couple drops, about a teaspoon and a half of vanilla. Now, I've crumpled down my cinnamon. We're going to have to be very careful to pull this out before we put the filling in the crust. We use just a little bit more water. Now, in my container of sugar, you might see marshmallows. This is not where I store marshmallows. 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, and half a tablespoon more because Mama said so. They are going to keep the moisture out of the sugar itself. Brown sugar has a tendency to clump. You could tell that my brown sugar wasn't clumping, and that's because the marshmallows are helping. Now, we're going to want to give one nice mix. I prefer using a wooden spoon. Part of it's aesthetic, but part of it is I like how it handles a little bit better than our plastic spoons. We're going to get a nice little mix in. Now careful, this is a softer apple, so we need to try not to hurt, bruise, or break our apple. And we're going to leave that there for about 10 minutes. Came back for a quick second just to give it a little stir. So, we see that the apple is fully cooked. It's nice and soft. It's still maintaining its shape. The fluid around it is really boiling and bubbling. This has been on for about 15 minutes, but remember, I'm at a much higher altitude, so it's going to take a little bit longer for it to do its thing. Again, you should have your apples ready in about 10 minutes. So we're going to move this. We've already turned off the heat. We're going to move this to the counter. So, at the end of everything, our pie crust has been chilling for just about 2 hours. What are we going to do next? So, remember we said we were going to be using this flour? We're going to lightly flour our surface. Something that I have found very useful is putting saran wrap on the surface so you can kind of see it. Putting saran wrap on the surface. That is going to help us. I touched my nose, so I have to clean my hands again. That's going to help us in the cleanup. Every time I make bread, biscuits, anything that involves any amount of extra flour, I always put just a little bit of saran wrap on my counter, and that's going to help me quite a bit. So we're going to put that there. I'm actually going to cut it in half. We have our pie dish here. And if you've seen other episodes, you might remember my trusty wine bottle. This wine bottle has been sanitized. It's been cleaned inside and out. It's been put into a bath of boiling water. And right before it was time for me to use it, I did clean it again. So it gets cleaned before and after every use. I'm going to put this over here so it's out of the way. We're going to roll this out, try to get it nice and thin. Now, what I'm finding here is that it's very brittle. It's not great. Preferably, our pie isn't going to be brittle. Our pie crust, I'm sorry. But it shouldn't, after being cooked, have any difference in flavor. It's just going to be harder to get that nice round pie crust shape. Push down. It takes quite a bit of weight. And we see that it's not really coming out circular shape. To get it circular, we move from the center outwards. But we see that it's getting nice and thin. Now, if your edges aren't pretty, don't worry about it. We're going to cut all those edges off. Okay, let's see. We need to do it just a little bit more. Take a little bit more of that crust on the edge. We're going to want to get a handy dandy butter knife. Not going to want to go too deep. I'm using my pie tin as a base, and I'm adding about an extra 1/2 inch because remember our pie is going to go up over the edge. Not the most perfect pie we've ever made. But we're going to do some Frankenstein business. So that we don't have any holes in the side of our crust. Okay. So let me go and grab our filling. We're going to start putting the apple into the crust. A little bit more Frankenstein in here. Careful not to put your hot pot on the saran wrap. Now we're doing little by little so that I can pull out any of our cinnamon. Now, if you don't like cinnamon, if you don't like spice, I do still suggest using vanilla, but you don't have to use cinnamon. Something else that you can use is nutmeg. You can use allspice in your apple concoction. Just pull some out. So let's take a little break while I fill this pie. Welcome back. So what have we been doing? We took our second piece of dough, rounded it out, and started working on making it nice and flat. Our apple is sitting right there. We've preheated the oven, and we're going to take our trusty knife again. And cut lengthwise. It won't be good old American pie unless we have a beautiful lattice crust. So we're just going to go lengthwise. Instead of going for a circle, this time I went for more rectangle shape. Of course, it had our edges, but that's fine. And we're going to lay it out. Cut off our excess because we're going to continue to use it. Leave a little bit of space in between our layers, our lettuce rather. Then we're gonna put all of our excess together, make it into a ball again. Use a little bit of water, a little bit more flour on our hands as well as on the board. I'm gonna go back to cutting. Now this time I'm gonna cut it just a little bit thinner than my last lettuce. And this is just to add a little bit of extra flair to the pie decoration. That one came out a little thicker. Okay. Let's see. Take every other. Now this is going to be a wide lettuce. Okay, so I've created the lettuce, but now I want to make an edge. Because without an edge, it's going to look underwhelming. Make sure there's no overhanging dough. We're going to grab a small bowl and an egg. You're going to want to use a fresh egg with our fork. Mix it up. We're creating an egg wash for our crust. Now I have this brush, which is for brushing sauce. Putting egg inside of the dispenser isn't really going to help us. So instead we're just using the brush. And we're going to brush every part of the crust and then toss it in the oven. And in a minute, after this short break, we'll see what it looks like. We'll see what our good old American apple pie comes out to be. And here we are with a beautiful pie. Let's get a close-up of that. We'll let you know how it tastes. Thank you for joining us today for Picken in the Kitchen.